the Awesemo NFL Tournament Strategy Show. Greg Ehrenberg here, joined once again by Neil Orfield. And we've got a pretty exciting slate to talk about here, especially because on the heels of just the other day, we had an Awesemo member win over $500,000 in a big showdown GPP. So that's really exciting. And hopefully we're able to replicate some of that magic today. Show is sponsored by No House Advantage. And we've got, a little short on time today, some games to talk about, going position by position. Neil, how are you feeling about this slate?
I'm excited about every slate, to be honest. My first look at it, I was like, I have no idea what to do with this slate, but after doing a little bit of research, I feel a little bit better about it. And I should say, yes, congratulations to Richie G. That was a pretty big takedown the other day. So awesome to see the Awesemo avatar up there.
Yeah, always, and also somebody who's been in our premium Slack chat for a while and is, always posting and stuff like that. So it's always cool when you go in Slack, and a lot of Slack can just be people trolling and talking about nonsense. And every once in a while, just something pops up where two people are arguing about the merits of somebody trolling EMAC and saying what they did in their intramural college basketball games and their style. And somebody's like, hey, look, I won $500,000.
Yeah, right.
Kind of a mix up. So also, yeah, if Richie's watching, congratulations. Definitely something that is very cool. But let's try to help some people win money on this slate as well in tournaments. And let's start with the quarterback position as we normally do. And a position that you and I both talked about. Oftentimes we'll both be a little bit flat at the position. We kind of spread out our exposure here. Generally, it's whichever quarterbacks fit into stacks or the quarterbacks that we're going to be on. And there isn't one quarterback that I think looks like a massively great play today, or for this week anyway. Is there any one quarterback that you are getting more exposure to than other ones?
No, yeah, I feel the same way. And honestly, so last week I read the comments. You're not supposed to read the comments, but one of the comments that I got was, this guy has a milli. He's going to play every quarterback. So I was like, okay, I'm going to cut it back. I'm going to try to talk about fewer quarterbacks this week, really shorten my pool. And then, of course, I start doing the research and I look at my list now, and it's just as long as it ever is. There's nobody who's really jumping out as like a must-have top play. Josh Allen looks great again. Team total of 32. So, you got to love Josh Allen in the Bills stacks. He's also got 3 viable receivers, which always helps. So I like Josh Allen, but yeah, he doesn't really jump above the field. I'm going to be playing a lot of quarterbacks again. Apologies if you hold that against me.
Yeah, and no issue with that. I mean, still, if you do look at Josh Allen, at least in our boom bust tool, it looks like a little bit stronger play on FanDuel. He's going a little bit over owned with a 15.5% chance to be the optimal quarterback, which is way higher than anybody else on the slate. The difference also he's more popular than the other quarterbacks. But still, I mean, Josh Allen, we do have the Bills also in our top stacks tool as being a team that's massively leveraged in terms of being under-owned, in terms of a team being odds being a top stack. So I right now have more exposure to Josh Allen than any other quarterback, but I mean, that's not really saying much. It just means that I get, 15% of Josh Allen compared to, maybe like 7 to 8% of a lot of other guys. And then also, like you said, there's a lot of players to stack Josh Allen with. And something that's kind of funny about Josh Allen, you and I had talked about this last week, and something that we ended up being on the right side of with Josh Allen is Josh Allen had a couple of bad games to start the season, and then everybody kind of got off him in terms of exposure last week, where he was really popular the first couple of weeks. Then he's 2 bad games after he was a runner-up MVP last year, and everybody's like, well, guess he's washed up now, like he's not that guy. But then he comes back and has a good game. So, and the ownership bounces back as well for this week. But let's talk about the merits of some of the other highly priced quarterbacks for this slate, where we have, Patrick Mahomes. He's fairly expensive. Kyler Murray also. Is this a slate where you are trying to pay up for quarterback, or is it just, once again, just kind of flat for you?
Yeah, so I thought that when I first started building out my quarterbacks, I thought I was going to be primarily the expensive quarterbacks because they look great in the tools. But then there are a few mid-range quarterbacks and a few cheap quarterbacks who also pop out in different tools. So there are some who look great in the top stacks tool and not as great in the boom bust, and vice versa. But Patrick Mahomes looks great all around. I mean, he's only projected for 8.7% ownership, 17.5 top stack odds. And that's, I think, partially because his receivers, he's just so concentrated on Kelsey and Hill. So the top stack odds get a little boost because those guys look great. But he's got an 11.8% boom probability. Gotta love that. I always love a team with a good offense and a bad defense because it just makes for a good fantasy game environment. And the Chiefs seem to have that so far this year.
Yeah, they definitely have a good quarterback. That's been no doubt. And something that's kind of funny about Kansas City is if I could go back in time and tell myself anything for every DFS slate over the last few years, it would be get overweight to Kansas City stacks and Patrick Mahomes because for their actual upside, I do feel like we generally don't see enough ownership on them, and it's always a thing like, oh, Patrick Mahomes, that seems obvious. But maybe not so much when people aren't getting to them at a crazy high clip. Still sub 10% ownership for Patrick Mahomes over on DraftKings, and then the ownership for let's see where Kelsey and Hill at. We've got Travis Kelsey projected for 14% ownership. Tyreek Hill projected for also 14% ownership. So it's not like there's a massive amount of the field flocking to the Kansas City Chiefs, even if it does seem like they are, fairly obvious on a bunch of slates when if we're just trying to evaluate who we think the best overall teams are. There's something kind of interesting to me in our boom bust tool that I want to ask you about your overall thoughts on. We have Taylor Heineke projected, and this is DraftKings specific, but he's projected for the second best odds of any quarterback to land in the optimal lineup, not picking up that much ownership. He's also really cheap. What do you make of that information?
I didn't list Taylor Heineke in my 14 or so quarterbacks that I wrote down here. So yeah, I'm not making much of it. I mean, I get it. They're playing against the Falcons. The Falcons have a bad defense. It probably makes some sense. But yeah, he didn't make my initial list of targets. Now I'm looking at it and I'm surprised that he didn't. I feel like that might have been an omission on my part because he's showing up as only 6% ownership and 12.6% boom percentage. So yeah, he's probably a better play than I was giving him credit for. I'm not sure how I missed him on my sheet. I thought he didn't project so well. So maybe I'm changing my tune right here, live on air. Taylor Heineke, according to the tools, looks great. I was planning on going to a lot of Antonio Gibson, but yeah, I guess you could play Taylor Heineke with Terry McLaurin and maybe Adam Humphries. Maybe this is his week finally. I guess he looks better now than he did. Maybe I just didn't refresh this recently enough. But he was not popping earlier, but now he's looking good.
So one thing I'll bring up with Heineke too is I'm surprised how often that Washington has allowed him to throw the football. We saw in a very competitive actually week 2 game against the Giants, the Washington won on a last second field goal. He threw the ball 46 times in that game. He wasn't massively efficient with his pass attempts, but when a quarterback's cheap and he has the upside to throw the ball over 40 times, that's something I'm going to be interested in. So I'm going to sort right now the stacks I have with Heineke and see which players are popping up most frequently with Heineke. I have a lot of Heineke with Terry McLaurin. Curtis Samuel is making his debut with Washington this week. He's the flat minute 3,000. Actually, I think that's one of the things that's really getting me to Washington stacks now looking at it, is you have a cheap quarterback, and then you also have Curtis Samuel, who's likely going to be starting and play, a sizable role for them at the flat min on DK. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but does that make sense to you from a salary saving standpoint of being able to stack Heineke with Samuel? Because it just opens up so much potential in terms of where to spend up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you can get a cheap stack in there and just spend up everywhere else, I don't see why you wouldn't want to do that. If the stack has enough upside, which the tools seem to think that they do.
Yeah, so he seems to be somebody who's popping up pretty meaningfully for me. He's actually my second most rostered quarterback behind Josh Allen now, which normally wouldn't be the case, except it's price sensitive daily fantasy sports. You got a flat min receiver and a cheap quarterback, and that combination is opening up a lot of other stuff. And then also the positive leverage in the boom bust tool. Now, another quarterback that earmark that I wanted to ask you about is how are you handling Jalen Hurts this week, where there's a lot of people who are convinced that Jalen Hurts is not going to be the quarterback of the future for the Eagles, which may be the case. However, he's still a tremendous fantasy upside quarterback just because of his ability to run the ball. Also, we have seen the Eagles be willing to let him throw the ball more this year, or even towards the end of last year, I think would have been expected coming into the year. Week 1, 35 pass attempts for Jalen Hurts. Week 3, he had 39 pass attempts. And the other thing, too, is even as much as people say, like, hey, Jalen Hurts has sucked this year, his fantasy point total is 29, 22, 25 and a half. He's still scoring fantasy points. So Jalen Hurts, who also rates out fairly well in our boom bust tool on both Kings and FanDuel, what do you make of him and his struggles in real life compared to his fantasy potential?
Yeah, I don't really care how good he is in real life. All I care about is how he does in fantasy. And yeah, he looked like a deer in headlights in the Cowboys game. I thought he looked terrible, but he ended up putting up pretty good numbers, and I needed him to. So I appreciated it that he came through in the end. But yeah, he's playing against Kansas City. It should be a high-scoring game. The Kansas City defense has not been great so far this year. The tools love Jalen Hurts. I mean, he's got a 6.7% projected ownership. That's really low for a guy who puts up fantasy numbers almost every week. Yeah, I'm loving Jalen Hurts this week.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. I'm getting to him, even though some of the real life performances maybe seem underwhelming. Ultimately, it doesn't matter how often we see a quarterback who sometimes they almost play better because they play poorly, a la Jameis Winston, or it's like, hey, look, Winston's thrown a lot of interceptions early in games, and we're going back a few years ago. And then as a result, it's down the stretch of a game, he just has to throw the ball a ton against prevent defenses, weaker defenses. So I think that what we've seen from Jalen Hurts this year is even with his real life struggles, he's pretty consistently producing fantasy results. So until something changes, where if there's a quarterback change, maybe he gets hurt or the Eagles hand the reins to Gardner Minshew, I'm going to be continuing to ride Jalen Hurts. But also, what other quarterbacks here? Is there anybody that we have not mentioned that you think is really important for us to be talking about a quarterback?
I don't know that I'd say he's really important to talk about, but I am interested in Lamar Jackson. Anytime you can get Lamar Jackson at 1% ownership, I see here now that this tool has been updated since I was doing my research a couple hours ago. So his ownership has come up to 1% from, he was at 0.7%. And I know it's a tough matchup. It's a really tough matchup for Lamar Jackson, but I just feel like he is so talented, and he's also kind of unlike any other quarterback. So like if a defense can contain 31 quarterbacks in the NFL, they still might not be able to contain Lamar Jackson. So I'm going to take a shot on Lamar at 1% ownership. He's got a 4.6% boom probability. So I really like that. Yeah, I mean, who else? One guy that I'm on, and it's not really based on the tools. So I wouldn't recommend it, because every time I go against the tools this year so far, I think I've been wrong. I think last week I decided to go under the field on Cooper Kupp, and of course we all saw how that worked out. But I'm going to keep doing it here and there. I'm going to take my picks. I'm going to try out Zach Wilson this week, I think.
Okay.
Just because Tennessee's defense has been so bad. And he's a rookie. We just don't really know. Is he really this bad? Maybe he's kind of going to calm down a little bit. You can stack him with Corey Davis. I don't mind playing Zach Wilson at 5,000 against that defense. Maybe I'm crazy, but I'm gonna give it a shot. One player in the similar price range who does look really good in the tools, so I'm going to try, is Jacoby Brissett. He's only projected for 1.6% ownership, but he has a 12.8% boom probability, at least in the last update before this one. I should double check that. And he's in the optimal 4% of the time. Yeah, looks like that's about the same. He's projected for 3.2% ownership, 12.8% boom probability, and 4.3% optimal. So that's really good. I mean, you love that. You love to see that. And Devontae Parker also really jumps out in the tool. So Brissett Devontae Parker stack is something that I'm interested in this week.
So, yeah, I think that all makes sense. Zach, here's actually I have two concerns about Zach Wilson. I was going to say my biggest concern, but there's multiple biggest concerns. The biggest concern, obviously, is how much he just is crap, and he just sucks so far. That's obviously a concern. The other thing that's also a worry for me about the overall game script for this game, on the Tennessee side, no Julio Jones, no A.J. Brown. I wonder if that just means a whole bunch of runs with Derrick Henry to overall slow down the pace and the number of plays that are in the game. So I haven't totally flushed out my thoughts on that game, but I'm kind of concerned that because, just from an obvious standpoint, it's, hey, they're missing the two top receivers. There should be a whole bunch of value at wideout for Tennessee. But then I kind of wonder on the other side, are they just going to run the ball 40 times with Derrick Henry this game? And they'll be like, hey, this is how we're going to run the game. I think that's a distinct possibility after his last two games, 41 touches in week 2. And then last week, he had 31 touches against Indianapolis. So the workload for Derrick Henry, once again, insane this year. That's probably my biggest concern there. And then also obviously Zach Wilson not being good, but the Tennessee defense has really struggled this year. So there's merit and the price points on the other side. But I want to bring up another rookie quarterback who I really poo-pooed on a lot last week. And Bears fans were not happy about some of the things I had to say about Justin Fields and the Bears offense. It didn't go well his first game, and that's an understatement. They had, I think it was net 1 yard of passing offense in that game. He was sacked 9 times. He completed 6 of 20 passes for 68 yards. He didn't even really get going on the ground, which I thought was one thing we could look at for Justin Fields, is that, well, maybe he'll be running the ball a lot. This is a much easier matchup for him, though. Last week, he was going up against a really, really tough Browns defense. Also, has a really strong front seven, strong defensive line. That's not going to be the case this week, where he is going to be drawing a much, much easier spot against the Detroit Lions defense. And I kind of think everybody's sleeping on Justin Fields now, where as last week, I felt he was a little bit overhyped going into the game. And now everybody's kind of backed off him a little bit. We haven't projected for 4% ownership. I think that because of some of the narrative around him and what happened with Detroit's offense, that it could be lower. Another thing to consider too, they haven't announced the starting quarterback yet. So obviously if he isn't starting, that all goes out the window. But all indication we've gotten so far is that Matt Nagy is going to wait until Sunday morning to make a decision on quarterback. I think that's ultimately going to mean, and assuming that Justin Fields starts, he could be sub 1% owned in a positive matchup with rushing upside. So Fields at 5,200. Do you think he could bounce back after what was really a terrible performance last week?
Yeah, I mean, he's on my list. I got a little bit scared. I didn't want to bring up Zach Wilson and Justin Fields back to back. I thought I'd get a lot of backlash for that. But yeah, I'm interested. 5,200 against Detroit, even if he is really bad. I mean, it's like we were talking about with Jalen Hurts. He might be really bad, and he could still put up a lot of fantasy points. That price against Detroit and only 4.3% ownership, and the tools like him. So, I mean, obviously we need to get word that he is starting, but if he does start, I'm just going to hope that, he's had rookie jitters. Maybe he's kind of worked it out. Even if he doesn't, he could just use his legs a little bit more, just run a little bit more. Actually, a lot more because he didn't run it all last game. I don't mind running him out without a receiver, although his receivers look decent too. So I don't hate an Allen Robinson stack or a Darnell Mooney at 3,900. I don't mind a Fields with Mooney stack either. So yeah, I'll play some Fields if he's named the starter.
Yeah, and also, once again, I think that the later that news comes out, the less ownership we're going to get on Justin Fields. And that's always something that's really hard to project and weigh in projections. But that's just kind of my own personal experience looking at projections is for late breaking news, particularly for football, the field isn't going to adjust as much as they would for something like NBA. So for quarterbacks, anything else you really want to bring up here? If not, we can move on.
No, let's move on.
Okay. Also, guys, today's show is sponsored by No House Advantage. If you guys are unfamiliar with No House Advantage, these are prop-based DFS contests. Really fun. You get a card and you build the props out and you take over-unders on them. You give them a confidence interval of 1 for one that you have really low confidence in, go up to 10 for the one you have the most confidence in. The higher number you give it, that's the amount of points you score if that prop hits. And also, if you're new to the site, make your first deposit using the promo code Awesemo. That will get you a $25 bonus on your first deposit over at No House Advantage. All right, let's hit up the running backs now. And there's a lot of good plays to me this week at the running back position. But first, I want to start with Alvin Kamara because we did have a question from Andrew Martinez earlier in the show. We asked if Kamara would be a fade over on FanDuel for tournament purposes. First off, no, for me. I'm going to be getting to a lot of Alvin Kamara, but also he rates out as being optimal way higher than any other running back, starting with DraftKings. 19.6% chance of being in the optimal lineup this week. The next best running back is David Montgomery at 13.4%. Then over on FanDuel, it's still fairly high optimal. It's not going to be quite the same as what he looks like on DraftKings just because of the lack of the PPR bonus. But actually, no, never mind. I had 23.7% chance of him landing in the optimal lineup on FanDuel. So I definitely don't think he's a fade. I think overall he's probably the strongest play on the slate to pay up for a running back. So I'm going to say the opposite. Don't fade him, Andrew Martinez. Go overweight to the field on Kamara, even if he is a little bit popular. But what do you say, Neil?
Yep, 100% agree. He's my favorite running back on the slate. Looks great in the tools. I also think that he's in a great spot where you can correlate him with the Saints defense against the Giants. I feel like I'm going to like that little bit of correlation there, but not that important of a correlation. Kamara is just a great play. I'm probably going to have north of 30% Kamara would be my guess.
Yeah, that's, I mean, he is, let's see, I have a little over 30% right now in my initial build. That makes him my most rostered running back. And I don't really see any reason that's going to change. Something else that's pretty encouraging about Alvin Kamara is I think we weren't totally sure how he was going to look in the passing game with Jameis Winston at quarterback. Last 2 games, 6 targets, 4 targets. He's been involved in the rushing game as well, even more so. I think people kind of forget this about Alvin Kamara is while he's been a great fantasy running back in the past, we generally haven't seen him get a ton of carries a lot of games. He's at 20 plus carries in 2 of the first 3 games of the season. The one he didn't was a game against the Panthers where they lost 26-7. It was just a total blowout. So it does seem like the Saints are more willing to get Alvin Kamara really involved in the run game as well this year, which is something we haven't seen as much in the past, which Maybe that's just a result of Latavius Murray not being there and somebody else to split carries with. But I also want to ask you about Derrick Henry. With no wide receivers in the mix, well, not no wide receivers, but no AJ Brown, no Julio Jones. Do you think that there's a chance that we see Derrick Henry just touch the ball like 35, 40 times this week?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've seen it, right? I mean, Derrick Henry is one of those guys that they just want to give him the rock, and I think they're going to without their top receivers there. I'm going to have a lot of Derrick Henry. He looks decent in the tools, not as good as Kamara, but his boom percentage is higher than his ownership percentage, his ownership projection. He's only in the optimal 10.6% of the time in the boom bust tool, which I don't love that when the optimal percentage is less than the ownership projection. But I feel like it's just such a good spot for him. Even if he's not in the optimal lineup, he could still be close enough that, you don't really need to have the optimal lineup to win the millie. You need to get pretty close, but you don't need to get all the way there. So I think, I'll be playing some Derrick Henry. I don't think you could fade him in this spot. I wrote in my notes, I think if I were playing 5 lineups, I probably wouldn't have Derrick Henry in any of them, just because he's in kind of a negative spot in terms of ownership versus optimal probability. But if I had 10, I think I would have him in 1. I think that's about where I'm at.
So for me, he's definitely going to be in my player pool. I prefer Kamara though, but still, that's just because I think Kamara is such a strong play, particularly where he's only 8,400 on DK, 9,000 on FanDuel. It's a favorable price tag for Kamara, and you're getting him at a little bit of a price discount compared to Derrick Henry, especially on FanDuel. He's $400 cheaper on DK. On FanDuel though, Kamara 9,000. Derrick Henry 10,200, and those $1,200 in salary savings, at least for me in the builds I've made so far, it really makes a difference. Here's somebody who I'm kind of struggling with this week, so I was curious to get your thoughts on, and that's Chuba Hubbard, because we saw last year when Christian McCaffrey first got injured, Mike Davis stepped in and basically played not the exact Christian McCaffrey role, but a comparable one. He was on the field almost every single snap. He's involved in the run game. He was involved in the pass game. I think there is that kind of upside for Hubbard, but considering they also had Royce Freeman in the mix last week, I'm a little unsure. But I mean, if he plays the role I think he's capable of, he's probably the best value play on the slate, particularly at only $6,300 over on FanDuel. But what are you expecting from Hubbard this week?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not locking him in, but I'm probably going to be over the field on Hubbard. He was in when I hand built my first lineups on every site. He was one of the first players in the lineup just because he's relatively cheap and he's got the upside to be given the Christian McCaffrey like we saw with Mike Davis, I think it's hard for a team to completely change their game plan in a week, and they might be hesitant to do that, especially if they have a player who might be able to fill the role. And I feel like Hubbard has the skill set to sort of kind of replicate Christian McCaffrey, not exactly, obviously, but I think he can step in and do a decent job in that role. So even though it is a new coaching staff this year, I kind of expect them to at least give him a shot at a big role in that offense. So I'm going to be playing over the field on Hubbard, and we'll just see how it plays out and adjust next week if we need to. But I'm willing to take the chance because I think that the upside is just huge, and the ownership currently only projected for 10%, and that's not enough to turn me away. So I'll be playing him.
He is one of the most positive leverage players over on FanDuel at only 6,300. So he certainly looks like a strong play there. Over on DraftKings, we have him popping up in the optimal line 13.1% of the time. 5,900 price tag definitely offers some good value. Still a little bit of a stronger play on FanDuel and DK, but I like him on both sites. But the player who is the number one positive leverage on both FanDuel and DraftKings this week is Darrell Henderson. And maybe his ownership changes as we get closer to lock, because he was considered questionable to play until he was confirmed last night that he was going to end up playing. Darrell Henderson, Sony Michel is also in the mix now, and he had some moments where he looked good last week. So Darrell Henderson, given his low ownership and his odds of being in the optimal lineup, is he somebody that you're liking to get overweight to the field on, or do you have some concerns about Sony Michel's role in the offense?
I mean, I'm trusting the tools on this one. He's a guy that I didn't look at and think I want to play Darrell Henderson at 5,600 against the Cardinals, but the tools tell me he's under-owned by kind of a lot. The Rams are expected to score a lot of points, and I think people are going to be playing the Rams pass catchers, so I think that there's a little bit of leverage there on Cooper Kupp primarily. I like the play, and it should be a high-scoring game. So I'm gonna be over the field on Darrell Henderson for sure on both sites.
Yeah, that's where I'm at, and also you and I were talking about our a dynasty league that was going on in Awesemo before this. I have Daryl Henderson there, which I kind of got lucky there because my running back depth is really crappy, and all of a sudden Daryl Henderson found himself in a good situation for the season, which certainly helps me. So I try not to have any kind of biases baked in, but if I kind of liked Daryl Henderson sometimes for a situation like that in dynasty leagues or in fantasy leagues before the season started for any reason, it kind of stands to reason that I would like them as the season goes on, especially when we've seen Henderson play well. Week one, and it's a little different of a situation because there was no Sony Michel there, but Henderson was on the field a ton, and he also played a pretty big role. So I think there is that upside for him to do something like that again. But I want to open up the floor to you here in terms of other running backs. Who are the ones that are really important to your builds right now?
I mean, David Montgomery looks really interesting, just because he's playing the Lions defense, and the Bears are actually expected to win this game. So you wouldn't. They're not going to be expected to win too many games if Justin Fields looks the way he has. But 2 weeks ago, David Montgomery was the workhorse back. Last week, the offense fell apart. So I think people are going to be a little bit scared away by the fact that he had, I think, like 3 carries last week. I'd have to look. Might have been more than that, but a couple weeks ago, he was the workhorse back, and now he's playing against the Lions defense. He should be able to run all over the Lions. They might not want to use Justin Fields. They might want to, work in David Montgomery a little bit more if Justin Fields doesn't look like we want him to look. And if it's not Justin Fields, I mean, Andy Dalton, Nick Foles, whoever it is, I think they're probably going to want to work in the running game just because they can. I mean, they're expected to win. They're less likely to turn the ball over if they're running it. I would expect the Bears to want to give Montgomery the ball kind of a lot, and he should be able to, pick up a lot of yards and hopefully a touchdown or 2 against the Lions.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably going to be if the Bears can't come through in this spot against the Lions, they're just going to suck this year. There's no spot where they are going to be able to come through, and maybe the Lions have looked better this year than we thought, and maybe they are somewhat competent of a team that played the Ravens tough last week. But still, ultimately, I think this is probably not going to be a good Lions team for the rest of the season. And the Bears, I think, are getting slept on a little bit right now. But on the other side of the game, I still have to mention DeAndre Swift here, just because his role, particularly in the passing game, has been so massive this year. And especially on DraftKings, we're getting the PPR points. The fact that we've seen 23 targets go to DeAndre Swift for the first 3 games of the year, that's a massively encouraging sign. Combined with, we saw their coach, Dan Campbell, a couple of days ago say, going forward, we're going to see more of DeAndre Swift. Now, that could just be coach speak. Who knows if that's actually true? But even if we just get the same amount of DeAndre Swift where he's targeted this heavily in the passing game, I dig it. I think that that's at least enough of a soundbite for me to think his role shouldn't take a step backwards. And we've seen DeAndre Swift get double-digit carries per game, his targets per game over 7. So I think that he's another guy on the other side of the game. Even if the matchup isn't ideal, I think he gets there just with his receiving abilities.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that I like better than a running back who catches the ball, particularly on DraftKings, but even on FanDuel, it's a big boost. It just raises your floor so much, and it raises your ceiling so much. I mean, if he gets 10 catches for 50 yards, that's 15 fantasy points just in receiving. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be playing a lot of Swift against the Bears. I feel like that's a game environment where it's just, we don't really know what to expect. This could be the rare game where the Lions actually win, and he has to, they want to run it more because they're winning. We'll see, but yeah, I really like DeAndre Swift. Jamal Williams early in the year kind of scared me off him a little bit, but Swift has just been being targeted so much that I'm not too scared away by Jamal Williams and counting on those targets.
Yeah, definitely. And especially the start of the first game, like he barely played in the first half of that game against the Giants, not the Giants, the 49ers. And then they got down by a massive amount in the second half. And the final score of that game ended up being 41-33. It was not nearly as competitive as the score said, but they scored a bunch of touchdowns in garbage time. And then San Francisco ultimately ended up recovering an onside kick at the end of the game. But yeah, there was just from that in that game, he was targeted 11 times, eight catches for 65 yards. He scored a late touchdown. And ever since then, I think the Lions looked at it more like, okay, I guess we just play DeAndre Swift more. We don't have to play Jamal Williams all that much. And yeah, that seems like that is going to be the game plan going forward. Any other running backs here that we want to be talking about before going over to wide receiver?
Yeah, just so I mentioned earlier, I like Antonio Gibson. I just feel like that price is pretty low for a guy as talented as he is against the Falcons defense. And in case, in case Washington football team doesn't want to go to Taylor Heineke, maybe they want to give it a little bit more to Antonio Gibson while Heineke's the quarterback. Probably wouldn't play them in the same lineup too much, but yeah, I'll be playing some Antonio Gibson. He looks good in the tools, only projected for 9.4% ownership. I like that in a spot against the Falcons. Zeke, I kind of like, and I don't usually like Zeke. I'm more of a Pollard guy. I go for Pollard in best ball. I'm usually scared away from Zeke, but 6,500, he looks really good in the boom bust tool. Cowboys are going to score a lot of points. The Panthers D has been good, but they've been playing against pretty bad teams. So I don't know if they're as good as they have looked so far this year, and they lost JC Horn. So yeah, I'm going to take some shots on Ezekiel Elliott. And then just, two more, we'll say. Myles Gaskin, I really like based on the boom bust tool specifically. He's only projected for 3% ownership with a 9% boom probability and a 5.7% optimal lineup score. That's really good. I love that. Anytime a player with that high of a boom probability has a 3% projected ownership, I like that. And he's only 5,300. And the Colts defense has allowed 13 explosive run plays, which is the third most in the league according to PFF. So I like his odds of making a big play. So give me Myles Gaskin. And then the last one, I had to mention Elijah Mitchell just because they're playing the Seahawks, and the Seahawks have been pretty atrocious against the run. They gave up 112 yards to Alexander Madison. They gave up 182 yards and 3 touchdowns to Derrick Henry. And the Niners like to run. I think they want to run the ball. They maybe didn't as much the last game because they had Trey Sermon. Actually, I think they still ran it a fair amount, but they had Trey Sermon out there, and I thought he looked pretty bad. So I'm not too afraid of Trey Sermon taking away from Elijah Mitchell's rushes. Maybe I should be, but I just feel like they were kind of forced to play Trey Sermon. They really didn't want to play Trey Sermon until all their other running backs got hurt. So I think it's going to be Elijah Mitchell's backfield, and he's only projected for 1.2 ownership. So I'm going to be playing some Elijah Mitchell.
Yeah, at 1.2% ownership, I can't really disagree that much. I find the 49ers running back situation to always be such a headache. There's always so many guys that are involved in the picture rotating in and out. And then it's even like week 1, for instance, when everybody was on Raheem Mostert. Did they have a good game running the ball? Yes, but it wasn't Mostert. It was Mostert gets hurt immediately, and then it's Mitchell steps in and ends up playing well. And I just always feel there's that possibility with the 49ers. Do they want to run the football? Yes. Are they going to have success running the football? Yes. Am I going to rush for the running back who scores the fantasy points and does the running? No, I'm on some other running back on the team. So once again, 1% ownership, I don't have an issue with it, but it's not likely going to be a spot that I'm on really just for those reasons.
So I think that's a reason for me. That's a reason that I don't want them in my season-long leagues. But in DFS, I feel like everybody thinks that same way. I don't want to play that guy because who knows what's going to happen with the running backs, and those are spots that I kind of like to target. So yeah, is it likely to pan out? Maybe not, because the 49ers, who knows what they're going to do. But when he's 1.2% projected ownership, that's when I want to play that kind of guy.
All right, guys, you can get access to all the great Awesemo Plus tools and content, stuff like the Boom Bust tool that Neil and I have been talking about, other things like ownership projections, all stuff that are massively important to my process, not just for football, but other sports as well. Baseball, another one that I'm pretty dependent on the tools we have on the site. And you get access to all of that with an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. Also, if you are new signing up for Awesemo Plus, you can use the promo code NFL Strategy Show. That's all one word, all capital letters. They'll get you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. And if you're just looking to play NFL for a week and test out some of the tools, you get an Awesemo Plus NFL package for just $3.95 weekly. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. All right, let's head on over to these wide receivers. And I have to ask you right off the bat, how are we handling Cooper Kupp this week? Here's the good news about Cooper Kupp. He's not going to be 1,000,000,000% owned, at least, because he's been priced up a little bit more appropriately. He's $8,600 over on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's priced at $7,800. So it's not some situation where Cooper Kupp is like $5,900 or $6,200. He's an actual legitimate price tag to him. So as a result, he's still going to be popular this week, but he's projected for sub 20% ownership. So how do you think Cooper Kupp is going to go this week? Is he once again just going to get all of the targets from Matthew Stafford?
I hope not. And I was so wrong. I mean, I wasn't so wrong, but I took a shot on playing more Woods than Cup last week, and that did not go well for me. Also played a lot of Van Jefferson and didn't play any Deshaun Jackson, so that didn't go well for me either. It's a little bit frustrating, not really knowing what they're going to do with the Rams receivers. I think I'm going to be right around the field with Cooper Kupp. I'm going to be right around 20% probably. I'm hoping to not get too much more than that. He looks good in the tools, and I think that's what the tools kind of point to. It's just playing right around the field. I'm glad that he's not so cheap anymore that everybody's going to be playing him, because those are the most frustrating when those guys go off, when a player is just too cheap for his talent. So yeah, I'm going to be probably right around 20% Cooper Kupp. And then I'm probably going to go a little bit over on Robert Woods, just because I can't believe that Cooper Kupp is now 2,500 more than Robert Woods on DraftKings, and he's going to get higher ownership. And the tools don't tell me that I should play Robert Woods, but I struggle with this.
And I think something too is with something like that is I don't know if you had any kind of biases coming into the season, but if I'm not mistaken, I think Robert Woods finished in DraftKings best ball leagues with a higher ADP than Cooper Kupp, which now you look back at that hindsight and be like, what the hell is that about? People are drafting Robert Woods ahead of Cooper Kupp. So there's a couple of ways to look at that. Number one is, were people on Robert Woods over Cooper Kupp for a good reason entering the season, and that Robert Woods is still going to be, a 1B maybe to Cooper Kupp's 1A going forward? Or is it just there's a change of quarterback? Matthew Stafford strongly prefers Cooper Kupp, and we're going to look back and just be like, boy, that's crazy. Robert Woods shouldn't have even been picked anywhere near some of the first rounds. But I think if you were really high on Robert Woods entering the season and you look at all the chalk going towards Cooper Kupp and you still think that there's going to be a bouncer receiver going forward, I don't have an issue going to Robert Woods. I'm a little concerned, though, just the way that he's been utilized so far with the quarterback change, that's never going to happen. But still, if that's a stand you want to take, I don't think that's a terrible decision, and there's a little bit of leverage to be had there. But I want to ask you something that you mentioned there about wide receivers that are just priced below their talent level, which was the case for Cooper Kupp to enter the season. But now we have over on DraftKings, Amari Cooper only priced at 6,000. And I understand it's been a couple of rough games in a row for him, but he opened the season with just a monster game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Last year when Dak Prescott was healthy, we were seeing big stat lines basically every single game from Amari Cooper. He's my favorite play wide receiver this week. As of right now, he's the player that I have the most exposure to. He's going under-owned in our tools at the moment. We have with a 19.4% chance to be in the optimal lineup. I like Cooper Kupp a lot. I like Amari Cooper a lot. Are you going to be able to talk me off him at all?
I'm not. I like Amari Cooper too. Like you said, he looks good in the tools. Playing Carolina, who again just lost J.C. Horn. It's a fun, high-scoring game. I'm expecting either Cooper or Lamb to do really well, and Cooper's just cheaper than Lamb, so and not projected for that much higher ownership. So I'll be playing both of them, both Cooper and Lamb. I'm planning on being probably above the field. Just because I'm expecting that to be a high-scoring game. And we didn't actually bring up either of those quarterbacks when we were talking about the quarterbacks, but I feel like both Dak and Sam Darnold are sort of interesting today as well, just because that is has potential to be a pretty big shootout, and there are several receivers that I like in that game. I'll be definitely over the field on Cooper, maybe a little bit over the field on CeeDee Lamb as well.
Yeah, and I think what you said there also makes a lot of sense. That's also why I overall like game stacks of this game. I like Amari Cooper a whole bunch on DraftKings. Actually, the two wide receivers we have in our boom bust tool with the best of odds of landing the optimal lineup. Number one is Amari Cooper. Number two is DJ Moore. And the reason that that's important is not only are they good plays individually, but then also that means you pair them together, you're adding increased upside. So I think I'm going to be getting a whole bunch of game stacks from that game just because the correlation makes sense. In our tools, everything looks under-owned there. So that's something that I really, really like doing, especially on DraftKings. FanDuel as well, although the pricing is maybe a little bit less favorable there, but still CeeDee Lamb looks pretty good in our boom bust tool over on FanDuel, and then a little preference towards Cooper on DK. But is DJ Moore also a receiver you like this week?
DJ Moore. I would guess that he's going to be the receiver that I'm highest on this week. Only projected for 18.1% ownership, but a 28.3% boom probability, 19.2% optimal. That just looks really good. And then Robbie Anderson, it's the same scenario as we were talking about with Kupp and Woods. We came into the year, I liked Moore better than Robbie Anderson, but Anderson just hasn't done anything this year. He's just been absent. But he's 5,100. I love that price on Robbie Anderson. I'm going to trust the talent. I'm going to play some Robbie Anderson. And also, maybe Trayvon Diggs is going to be on DJ Moore. Like, I don't pay too much attention to individual defensive matchups, but when it benefits what I already kind of want to do, then I, write that narrative a little bit that maybe Trayvon Diggs is going to be on DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson will be the more open receiver this week. So yeah, I'm going to be taking some shots on Robbie Anderson too.
Yeah, and I would dig more into that, but we only have 8 minutes left to go here. I would talk more about why I don't like some of the wide receiver versus cornerback matchups. A couple of them being is because, number one, we don't actually the main thing, we don't actually know who's going to guard which receiver. And then the wide receiver could have that could have success in the matchup anyway. Like, I remember on the Thursday night game where the Giants played Washington, and I was doing live before lock, and everybody in the chat's going, you can't play Terry McLaurin because James Bradbury is going to be covering him. James Bradbury sucks so far this year, and he got torched by Terry McLaurin in that game. So you don't know also where a cornerback, especially at the beginning of the year, he might not be as good as he was last year. And more often than not, good talent on offense does beat out good talent on defense, especially true in NBA, but football as well. So not anything I concern myself too much, but any other wide receivers here that are making it into a good portion of your lineups? We could talk more about wide receivers and then go a little light on the tight end and defense talk if you want to stretch the wideouts.
Yeah, so I want to continue that thought. So this is some advice that I gave to somebody. Somebody asked me for general advice on DFS, and the advice that I gave them in NFL DFS is play good players in bad matchups and bad players in good matchups. And by that, what I actually mean is play players who have high fantasy point per game in bad matchups and play players who have low fantasy point per game in good matchups, because people are going to be shying away from, for example, DeAndre Hopkins this week. People aren't going to want to play DeAndre Hopkins against Jalen Ramsey. He's only projected for 2.9% ownership. I'm going to take some shots on a guy like Hopkins in that matchup just because others are shying away from it. And DeAndre Hopkins can put up 110 and 2 touchdowns against any defense. It doesn't matter who he's playing against. I don't worry about individual defensive matchups all that much. So yeah, I'll be playing some DeAndre Hopkins. AJ Green actually looks better in the tools than DeAndre Hopkins, only projected for 3.2% ownership. So I'll be playing some AJ Green. I'm also interested in the Niners. Again, that I feel like that San Francisco Seattle matchup looks pretty interesting to me. That's another, we didn't really talk about those quarterbacks, but they're both somewhat interesting. But Deebo Samuel looks incredible in the boom bust tool. Only projected for 14.8% ownership, but a 27.2% boom probability, and also 14% in the optimal lineup, which is a little bit under his ownership. But yeah, I'm gonna take Deebo Samuel in that game environment. And Brandon Ayuk doesn't look amazing in the tools, but Brandon Ayuk for 5,000. I just want to believe in Brandon Ayuk, I guess. I'm going to take some shots, hope for the best.
He was more involved last week. He caught a touchdown pass. And, he's also somebody who I think a lot of people are going to look at what happened week 1. And if that had happened in the middle of the season, just kind of write it off as a one-off situation. But he was hurt for a lot of the offseason. He just didn't get the reps in that I think he needed entering the season. And then I think people see what happened week 1, just be like, oh, I guess Brandon Ayuk is a bust now. But he's seen his workload tick up, and once again, he played an actual role last week. And bringing up what his exact stats were from that game, he finished with, let's see, he was targeted. He was targeted 6 times. He caught 4 of them for 37 yards and a touchdown. If he's somebody who's going to be drawing, 6+ targets a week, right at a 5,000 price tag in a game that we're expecting to be pretty high scoring. I mean, that game is a 52-point total. That is one of the highest marks from the entire slate. It is the 3rd highest mark. The only ones that are higher are the Eagles Chiefs game and the Rams Cardinals game. If this is going to be a high-paced game with a lot of throwing involved and Ayuk is actually back involved in the offense now, I think that's totally reasonable take, and he's somebody to be involved in, thinking that he sees an uptick going forward. And let's jump over to the tight ends now, and we just kind of hit on some of our favorite tight ends before handing over to the NASCAR strategy show. There is a lot more DFS content coming up today, guys. There's a NASCAR show. There's MLB Live Before Lock that I'll be doing later. Just do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel so you get when all that stuff is going live, and support Neil and I also, because that's always helpful. And also, if people didn't know who are watching the show, Neil did win a Millie Maker last year, so it's not like this is just some guy who's on here talking about dart throws in NFL DFS or whatever. Neil's had a lot of success using the tools on the site, so definitely also you guys should be checking him out on Twitter and following him. His Twitter handle is right now up on the screen. But all right, tight ends here. Here's one guy that I'm getting to a decent amount over on DraftKings that I want to hear your thoughts on. Anthony Ferkshire. Just because he's cheap at the tight end position, all of the other guys here as pass catchers for the tight end at this point are out of commission. There's no AJ Brown. There's no Julio Jones. So the passes have to go somewhere. Tight end is already a position that's hard to fill. What do you think the merits are of playing Ferkshire this week?
I love it. He is not somebody I had listed on my sheet. So that's really fun. Yeah, he doesn't look great in the tools. So maybe that's why I just didn't pull him up, because he was not showing up that great in the tools. But yeah, that makes so much sense. He's a player that I think, as I'm actually making, so I haven't made my lineups yet. I start with looking through the tools and then I make my lineups. And usually as I make my lineups, I go through position by position and think about, okay, how much more do I want of that player, less of that player? But that makes so much sense with both Julio Jones and AJ Brown out. Ferkshire was a guy I was really high on in the offseason. I think I predicted he was going to be a top 10 tight end to some of my friends. I'd like to take that one back, but for 1 week, I think you could make it happen. Yeah, I like that play. There are a couple cheaper tight ends who are also in decent spots, so that takes away from it a little bit. You know, you love having the cheapest possible guy, but yeah, I like that play.
Yeah, and then, I mean, obviously in the pay-up spot, we could always get to Travis Kelce. George Kittle's been priced down a little bit, so I don't think we have too much to go in depth about Travis Kelce. If you have the salary to spend up for tight end, you're playing Travis Kelce, and he becomes a fairly high priority in that sense. But I want to ask you about George Kittle, and I think we could close out with thoughts on this. What do you make of his slow start to the season, and do you think that in a spot that we do expect to be high scoring, that we could see him bounce back, and maybe this is the last spot to really get George Kittle as a buy low option?
I expect to be way over the field on George Kittle. I mean, he's only projected for 10.3% ownership. The tools just love him. He's got a 21.9% boom probability. Tight ends have been just crushing the Seahawks. Even Tyler Conklin last week scored a touchdown against the Seahawks. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be hammering Kittle into some of my lineups.
All right, and let's just close with this. Neil, if you were playing one entry in a GPP and you can only make one stack, what would be your quarterback to pass catcher combination?
I think I would probably go with, I'm going to go all the way down to Jacoby Brissett and Devontae Parker.
I dig it. That's not what I was expecting you to say, but
large field. I'm talking huge, large field.
Yeah. No, I understand. For me, I'm going to go with I'm going to go double stack here. Justin Fields with Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney. I think the game from Justin Fields last week was not good. There's reason to be concerned going forward, but this is a terrific match for him against the Detroit Lions. And I think that we see a little bit better version of a young quarterback who's cheap and has a lot of fantasy upside because of his ability to run the football. So guys, that is going to do it for us this week. Thank you very much for watching. Hit the like on the video. Also subscribe to the YouTube channel. Stick around because we got more DFS content coming up.